This lesson will continue with Chapter 11, Key Issue 3, looking at sources of energy. We're going to be getting into 3.7 on solar energy. The ultimate renewable resource for sustainable development is solar energy, and that is supplied by the sun. Solar energy offers the possibility for countries at low levels of development to promote sustainable development. Through solar energy, people and businesses in developing countries currently unable to obtain electricity can generate energy needed to operate businesses, schools, and hospitals. There are several ways that the sun can be used for energy. There's passive solar, using sun energy for heating, active solar, converting sun energy to electricity, and at the same time, solar power can charge electric cars and electrify remote villages, meaning that it can provide electricity to more rural areas. Take a look at Figure 11-56 located on page 413 of your textbook. You'll see solar panels installed on an apartment rooftop in the Old City of Jerusalem, and these are used to heat water, which is stored in the adjacent tanks. One major concern regarding energy consumption is its contribution to air pollution. Industry is a major polluter of air, water, and land. People rely on air, water, and land to remove and disperse waste from factories, as well as from other human activities. Pollution occurs when more waste is added than air, water, and land resources can handle. Air pollution concerns geographers on three different scales: global, regional, and local. Two global issues are climate change and ozone damage. UN scientists have concluded that the temperature increase is directly linked to human actions, especially the burning of fossil fuels in factories and vehicles. The increase in Earth's temperature caused by carbon dioxide trapping some of the radiation emitted by the surface is called the greenhouse effect. Energy consumption is creating ozone damage. The ozone is a gas that absorbs ultraviolet radiation in the stratosphere. If the ozone in the stratosphere did not exist, UV rays would damage plants, cause skin cancer, and disrupt food chains. Looking at the regional scale, air pollution is damaging regions' vegetation and water supply through acid deposition. The world's three principal industrial regions are especially affected by acid deposition. Acid deposition is the accumulation of acids on Earth's surface. Sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides emitted by burning fossil fuels enter Earth's atmosphere and combine with oxygen and water to form sulfuric acid and nitric acid. All of this is deposited on Earth's surface. Acid deposition accumulates on Earth's surface, but acid precipitation can do the same thing with Earth's rain, snow, or fog, and the acids can also be deposited in dusts. This acid precipitation damages lakes, killing fish and plants. On the land, concentrations of acid in the soil can injure plants by depriving them of nutrients, can harm worms and insects. Buildings and monuments made of marble and limestone have suffered corrosion from acid rain, and the United States has reduced sulfur dioxide emissions significantly in recent years. Another major source of air pollution is at the local scale, particularly with urban air pollution. So this type of pollution is typically the result of a large number of factories or motor vehicles concentrated in an urban area. Let's take a look at Figure 11-57 located on page 414 of your textbook. We see climate change and CO2 concentrations. Since 1880, carbon dioxide concentration has increased by more than 1/3, and Earth has warmed by about 1 degree Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Ultimately, this is a result of human-caused increases of carbon dioxide that have increased global temperatures. Looking at Figure 11-59, we see that the worst effects of acid deposition are experienced further east than the principal sources of emissions. Within the United States, the major generators of acid deposition are in Ohio and other industrial states along the southern Great Lakes, but the severest effects of acid rain are felt in several areas farther east. Looking at figures 11-60 and 11-61, urban air pollution is worst in South Asia, particularly in urban areas like Delhi, India. 3.9 will address water pollution, and there are two types of water uses, non-consumptive and consumptive. Non-consumptive water usage is the use of water that is returned to nature as liquid. Most industrial and municipal uses of water are non-consumptive because the wastewater is primarily discharged into lakes and streams. Consumptive water, on the other hand, is the use of water that evaporates rather than being returned to nature as a liquid. Most agricultural uses are consumptive because the water is used primarily to supply plants that transpire it and therefore cannot be treated and reused. When water is polluted, it comes from sources. There are two types of sources you should be familiar with. A point source that comes from a specific location, or a non-point source where it's diffused from a specific area. Examples of point sources might include factories or power plants that use water for cooling and then discharge the warm water back into the river or lake. This process raises the temperature of the body of water it enters. Fish that are adapted to cold water, like salmon and trout, might not be able to survive the warmer water. The next type is municipal sewage. In developed countries, sewers carry wastewater from sinks, bathtubs, and toilets to a treatment plant, where most but not all of the pollutants are removed. The treated wastewater then typically gets dumped back into a river or a lake. In developing countries, sewer systems are rare, and wastewater often drains untreated into rivers and lakes. The drinking water usually removed from the same rivers can be inadequately treated, and the combination of untreated water and poor sanitation makes drinking water deadly in some developing countries. This can lead to waterborne diseases like cholera or typhoid. Getting into non-point sources, the principal non-point source is agriculture. Fertilizers and pesticides spread on fields to increase agricultural productivity, but they're carried into rivers and lakes by irrigation systems or natural runoff. Although the expanded use of fertilizers and pesticides can help avoid global food crises, it can also destroy aquatic life by polluting rivers and lakes. Take a look at figure 11-63, looking at per capita water withdrawal for world regions. North America has the world's highest per capita consumption of water, more than 3 times the worldwide average. This is primarily because of agriculture rather than industry. Looking at figure 11-65, we see a factor in Wolfen, Germany. Discharging water. Water pollution from a single factory is considered a point source pollution example. Figure 11-66 is an example of a non-point source pollution. This pollution is entering water from informal housing in Delhi, India, representing a non-point source. Remember that agriculture is also another example of a non-point source pollution. 3.10 gets into solid waste and sanitary landfills. Look at figure 11-67. Landfills store solid waste disposed of by Americans, and recycling has decreased the per capita contribution to landfills. Take a look at where they're concentrated. A sanitary landfill is the most common place for disposal of solid waste in the U.S. More than 1/2 of the country's waste is trucked to landfills and buried under soil. Chemicals released by the decomposing solid waste can leak from the landfill into groundwater. This can contaminate water wells, soil, and nearby streams. Low transportation costs may mean it's often cheaper to ship waste to states where landfills can charge low fees for accepting solid waste than to dispose of it locally. This is why you may see a lot of landfills concentrated in specific states. Looking at figure 11-69, we see that toxic chemical release sites include Ohio, having the most sites, even though the largest sites are mines in the West. The largest landfill is said to be the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This is actually a bunch of garbage that's floating in the Pacific Ocean. It is estimated to be twice the size of the state of Texas, and the patch is created by slow-moving currents that converge in the area. Trash is collected from all over the world, and plastic constitutes 90% of the trash floating in the ocean. Lastly, key issue 4 of chapter 11 is going to look over why industries are changing locations. First, looking at 4.1, we're going to see where industries are emerging. We'll also see in 4.2 industrial change in developed countries, in 4.3 skilled or unskilled labor, and 4.4 recycling and remanufacturing. Nearly one half of the world's industry used to be in Europe and nearly one-third in North America, but now these two regions account for only one-fourth each. Industry's share of total economic output is declining in developed countries, but increasing in developing countries. One major reason that's contributing to this is the fact that low-paid, low-skilled jobs are now being moved to developing countries. This is also known as outsourcing. Also, looking at Mexico, the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA, created industrial growth in Mexico specifically. Even though the United States and Canada have moved toward different types of sectors away from manufacturing, we see that Mexico has still been able to provide labor at a much cheaper cost, especially when it comes to the auto industry. Factories that are situated in Mexico that are typically used to produce products that are US based, for example, are known as maquiladoras. Brazil, Russia, India, and China also make up BRIC countries, and they're projected to be major industrial growth countries in the future. The 4 countries that make up BRIC together encompass 1/4 of the world's land area and contain 3 billion of the world's 7 billion inhabitants. But the 4 countries combined account for only 1/6 of the world's GDP. China is eventually expected to surpass the GDP of the United States and become the world's largest economy, and India is expected to become the second largest economy around 2050. It is said that if these 4 countries stick together and work together to strengthen each other's economies, that they can really dominate the global economy, potentially surpassing many of the core countries that are positioned and established as superior in the global economy. Let's take a look at 11-70. We can see that manufacturing represents declining share of GNI, or gross national income, in developed countries. It has been fairly constant in developing countries since 1980. Taking a look at vehicle production in Mexico, looking at figure 11-72, we can see that the North American Free Trade Agreement began in 1994. We can also see how this vehicle production has increased tremendously in Mexico. In figure 11-73, we see that Mexican industries have increased vehicle exports to the United States since NAFTA. Looking at figure 11-74, India is expected to match the GDP of the United States by the 2050s, and China is expected to exceed it in the 2020s. Industry has also shifted in the United States. Looking at figure 11-75, we can see that industry in the US has shifted to the south. This is in part because of right-to-work laws in southern states. These are anti-union and also encourage much lower wages, and so these low-skilled jobs, low-wage jobs are attractive for this region. Looking at figure 11-76, we see that motor vehicle production is shifted to Mexico as well as the US South. Again, lower wages. Again, the fact that unions are discouraged in those regions as well. We can also see how this is shifted in Europe. In figure 11-77, we see that motor vehicle production is shifted to Eastern Europe for some of the same reasons. Lower labor jobs, but also proximity to markets where they can be sold. There are some debates when it comes to skilled labor being an advantage over cheap labor, but with unskilled workers. And so when we look at what can be offered, we look at teams with flexible tasks, the ability to problem solve, less hierarchy, and also productivity from more skilled operators in decision making. Recycling and remanufacturing are both increasingly used in industry as ways to promote a more sustainable production process. Figure 11-83 shows that around 1/2 of paper and 1/4 of yard waste are recycled, whereas 10% of other sources are recycled.